special treat, team. We are joined by the one and only Michael Knowles. He is the host of the aptly named Michael Knowles Show, which makes a lot of sense, over at the Daily Wire, dailywire.com for all of his latest. Michael, great to see you, man. How you doing?
Good to see you, Buck. What's going on?
Not much. So I'm here East Coast in the middle of lib crazy town, New York. You're out there on the West Coast in the midst of beach shutdowns. Just first tell me, what is the feeling like right now in California when, in New York, we got hit really badly, right? You guys did not get hit really badly. And yet I keep seeing all these videos, and we played some of the audio here on the show of like helicopters yelling at people to go inside. And what the heck is going on?
Yeah, relatively speaking, California is fine, particularly compared to New York. You may have actually seen one of my videos going around over the weekend because, Buck, I don't know if you knew this when you invited me on the show. You are speaking right now to a criminal. I violated Daddy Newsom's stay-at-home order. I went onto the beaches, and I got these videos down in Orange County over the weekend of helicopters shouting at people, go indoors, stay off of the very wide-open beaches, and crowd into dank apartment buildings. And we went to Huntington. We went down to Newport Beach. The trouble here is that the governor, Gavin Newsom, about a month and a half ago, said more than a month and a half ago, said that California was going to be devastated. It was going to be just like New York. We needed to bring in the hospital ships. We needed a lot of federal aid. None of that happened. He shut down the whole state because all of these two-bit politicians were trying to one-up each other on who could take the virus more seriously. None of that happened. It obviously caused massive devastation in the fifth largest economy in the world. The numbers are much lower, thank God, very happy to hear about it. And now, instead of lightening up on the lockdowns, they're actually doubling down. Now, as there appears to be no argument left for the lockdown, don't forget the point of it was to lower the curve so as not to overwhelm the healthcare system and buy time for a vaccine. We haven't even come close to overwhelming the healthcare system. We're not going to get a vaccine before this thing spreads. So there's no argument left in California for this lockdown. He doubles down. I think it's about flexing arbitrary power. I think it's about punishing political opponents, which is why Newsom targeted Orange County, which is one of the few conservative counties in California. And I think at this point it's about covering his political derriere because he got it so wrong that he needs to at least perform the prophecy that he made, which is that this virus would devastate California.
So Michael, I just want to know, how's it going for the people of California who recognize this for what it is? Out in Michigan, there have been these protests because I actually went years ago and gave a speech in Central Michigan, and Central Michigan is redder than parts of Alabama that you would think of as very red. Central Michigan, people like the right to bear arms, people like their freedoms. I have not seen anything like that yet in California, except there seem to be some protests along one of the beaches. So are those general, is this a politicized protest or a partisan protest like you're seeing elsewhere, where it's generally people that I think are more, pro-freedom, pro-Second Amendment, who are standing up to what they view as an increasingly tyrannical government? Or is this just people who are saying, hey, open up the beaches. This is so dumb. I don't even care what my politics are.
It's a little bit of both, but it's more politicized than not politicized. I was walking along Newport Beach yesterday, and there was a guy who was sitting there with his Harley parked on the beach, American flag sticking out of it, and he looks at me as I'm walking by with my wife, and he just goes, feels good to be free, doesn't it? And we saw a number of these people who were protesting as well. You had some pro-lifers out there. You had
like a Daily Wire tattoo on his shoulder, by the way.
Yeah, he did. I always can really spot the fans with the huge Daily Wire tattoos on their chest. This guy did look like one of us. He looked like a conservative guy. And I saw yesterday former President George Bush put out a video, and he basically said we shouldn't politicize this virus. We shouldn't treat it as a political matter. And I like the intention that I suspect was behind that video, but I don't think the point is quite right. This has been politicized from the very beginning. It has been politicized by liberals and by the left who want to use the veneer of science to take all of our political choice away from us. So what they're saying is we can't listen to the president, we can't listen to our elected representatives. We have to listen to the exalted experts, the great Dr. Fauci, the oracle who will tell us when we're allowed to go outside again. This is the liberal technocratic vision of how society should be run, by progressive experts who tell us all exactly what to do. But that's not how politics really works. Politics is not an exact science. We discuss things with one another. We debate. We persuade our fellow citizens. And, when people go a little too far and they prioritize total safety, over the freedoms that we all enjoy, ironically actually undermining public health because they're taking away those freedoms, because externalities happen, like suicides going up, drug overdoses going up. Because of that, it is totally right for us to debate that and go out and push back on arbitrary power. And I think that's what you're beginning to see in the more conservative counties.
We're speaking to Michael Knowles of the Michael Knowles Show over at the Daily Wire. Michael, the plan for the liberals in California is what exactly? In New York State, we have a 12-point plan that Governor Cuomo has put out that is absurd. I mean, the worst part of it, or I should say the most unrealistic part, is test and trace. People keep saying, and they think that this is smart, we need to get to, depending on who you ask, 5 to 20 million tests a day. Who's going to take these tests? I mean, unless they're going to, and maybe this is the plan, they're going to force people to line up like cattle and all just keep taking, because you'd have to do it every 2 weeks as well to make sure you had continued, if you didn't have antibodies, you're still susceptible to it, right? So the test and trace scheme that they're talking about does not seem feasible in the least to me and other people I talk to, including doctors who don't want to get in trouble for speaking publicly about this. There's a lot of that. What's the plan in California exactly? And I'm assuming that there's you guys have like your own version of a coastal coalition, right? There's Washington, Oregon, California are all working together. So how's the West Coast supposed to open up?
Well, as you point out with something like test and trace, the fact that it's not feasible is a feature, not a bug of the plan. They keep moving the goalposts on all of these reopen schemes because all of the predictions failed to come true. And so they're trying to get to a standard that's not possible to achieve so that they can justify having arbitrary power and proving that Donald Trump is a very bad man and they were all right to lock down and defend every position they've taken. We're seeing that same thing happen out here in California. It tells you a lot about the priorities of this state, though. They've issued a four-step plan in California. We're in phase 1, then we're weeks away from phase 2, and then we are months away, to quote the governor, from phase 3 and phase 4. In phase 2, you begin to open up things like schools and daycare centers and retail shops. But it's not until phase 3 that you open up churches and other places like gyms and things like that. Consider the priorities, how warped this society has become. The virus is no less deadly at school than it is at church. If older people go to church, they can obviously stay home. The kids who are going to school could infect their teachers or their guidance counselors or the administrators, go home and infect the rest of their families. It's not as though this would prevent, large numbers of people from gathering. Schools are a lot bigger than churches, generally speaking. It just shows that as a society, we've prioritized. We need to get the kids out of the house. We've got to get them into places where they can be indoctrinated into the ideology of the state. We've got to open up retail businesses so people can continue to consume cheap products, probably manufactured in China, but we won't open up churches because we don't need to open up churches because, come on, all that stuff is just silly superstition anyway. I think these are the thoughts that are going through Gavin Newsom's mind, and he's got a coalition, as you say, of various states in the region, which, by the way, on the face may be unconstitutional because there's a little language in the Constitution about how the states are not allowed to form alliances with each other beyond the scope of the federal government. So obviously nobody in the State House in Sacramento has even given that a moment's thought. They tend not to focus very much on the Constitution to begin with, and I think that's part of the reason why we find ourselves in this pickle here, where the arbitrary power increases, and as the virus itself gets better, all of a sudden we find ourselves in a much worse political situation.
How far are you from personal non-compliance, and how deep on that are you willing to go? I mean, I was out over the weekend here in New York, and every time because everyone here pretty much has masks in public, including people in their cars, they've got masks on inside their vehicle by themselves, jogging, on bicycles. By the way, if the virus, first of all, if you're on a bicycle, the chances are you're probably under 70, which means that your chance of dying from this, if you were to get it, as we know statistically, is very, very small. And especially the guys that wear the like super tight lycra, neon racing suit stuff, those guys tend to be, and gals tend to be younger, healthier cyclists. If the virus can fly through the air and go up their nose and infect them while they're on their bicycle in a bike lane and no human being is like near them for more than half a second, we're all going to die. I don't think
that's right.
Like, we've reached this point of absurdity. And so I pull my mask down a little bit, or I take it off. And I'm like a rebel without a cause for a second until I realize, well, I guess I do have a cause. But this is absurd and this is all dumb. And I look around, but I'm like, they're the crazy people. But Michael, they think that I'm crazy. Where are you on this?
Of course, I'm a little bit more on your side, Buck. You'll be shocked to hear. We like to hope, of course, that the people wearing the very tight bicycling suits tend to be the younger, healthier people. Sometimes we're not always so lucky. This is part of the arbitrary problem, right? Initially, we were told by the Surgeon General, masks do not work. Stop buying masks. Don't buy masks. Multiple exclamation points. Then, about 5 minutes later, the same guy says, hey, by the way, go buy masks. You have to buy masks. It reminds me of that line that could be so often applied to leftism, that which is not prohibited is mandatory. And that's what we're seeing with the masks. Of course, people wearing masks in their car are like people who wear socks in the shower. They don't seem to understand what the purposes of masks are anyway. The point here is to take reasonable mitigation, but unfortunately people have been whipped up into hysteria here. And so no, if I'm walking out along the beach and I'm 10 feet away at least from anybody, I'm not going to wear a mask. A funny point on the beach, of course, I'm non-compliant to begin with because I have gone to the beach, and yet researchers out of East Anglia University are showing that there's a significant correlation between a vitamin D deficiency and risk from coronavirus. So it would seem to me probably pretty healthy to go out and get a little bit of sunshine. That's true most of the time. But we're now past the point of staring coldly and objectively at the facts. We're now at this point of whipped up hysteria where if you walk out onto the sidewalk without a mask, people look at you like you're a character in Contagion. They look at you like you're personally massacring their grandparents or something. That level of social hysteria is not sustainable, but it does leave us vulnerable.
A guy in Boston got arrested for pulling a knife on somebody who was jogging without a mask. Did you see that? I mean, that's where, and we know this is a real story because there was an arrest made. This is a real thing. Yeah. That's where we are with all this. I mean, I just wonder when it becomes a duty for those of us who have platforms to start saying, you know, if your conscience dictates non-compliance, which is effectively civil disobedience. I mean, I think that's in New York, we're going to have that before they stop. And I worry that it'll take a long time too, that this economy will essentially be completely beaten down and crushed. And then people will start to realize we can't continue with the man, but it'll be too late. That's my concern here. But I also think that the authorities will drag this out to the point where that's your only option. It's just to say, I'm not doing this meaning keep your business closed no matter what, because the plan, as I said, is insane. Do you guys think it's going to be a little better than that? I mean, remember, we've had far more cases, and so there's a greater sense of public fear and urgency around this than there is or at least I assume there is on the West Coast. Is Newsom going to let this stuff go loose by June, July?
No, absolutely not. The reason why they're not going to loosen up, no matter if it's California, which is doing basically fine, or New York, which is doing less fine, is that there's no political incentive to reopen. You know, left-wingers in the media like Bill Maher told us months ago that they were praying for an economic recession because that would cause some pain, but it would be a lot better than having 4 more years of Trump. So they've already got that in place. You've seen other media figures do this. Obviously, there's a political incentive for Democrats to keep the economy depressed. House Democrats and Senate Democrats, too, in that relief bill, negotiated a provision that would disincentivize employment, that would make the unemployment benefits such that it was better not to work than to work, and this would last basically right up until the election. So there are a lot of people, and there's a lot of evidence that people are working behind the scenes to drag this thing out. Obviously, prudence is a virtue. If I were, on the streets of New York, I were tightly surrounded by 100 other people, maybe I would put the mask on, right? If I'm walking on a beach in California, if I'm walking along in Central Park or something, I'm not surrounded by anybody, then I'm not going to put the mask on at all. And I think that the people who are demanding it merely to flex their muscles. There's obviously no evidence of a public health benefit, but that's the danger we're in. And I think that the conservatives, perhaps like the former president, who are arguing that we've got to stop treating this as a political matter, what they're arguing is unilateral surrender, unilateral disarmament. Yeah.
No, I think that's true. Well, before we let you go, Michael, I just have to know something. You know, some other commentators out there have decided to use this as an opportunity to let things loose a little bit. And they have, in fact, grown a bit of facial hair. Now, you and Mr. Ben Shapiro, you guys both look like you're showing up for the first day at the law firm, completely clean shaven. Can the fans at the Daily Wire expect any change in this?
Buck, I'm going to make a confession on your show right now. I tried it. Okay, I was home for a few days before I decided I'm going to come back into the studio. So I tried it, and it turns out I'm really good at growing a beard everywhere except right like here, except for this one patch right next to my.
You got to go top. You bring him back.
That's true. Maybe I could do a Fu Manchu.
Walsh has had a man beard for like the last decade, so we know Walsh he's already been there. Like Walsh was born with a beard, I think. Like he came out actually as an infant with a beard on. But you and Shapiro, clean shaven.
The only one that I want to grow is a Fu Manchu, and then I assume I'll be accused of cultural appropriation. But it seems like the most fitting sort of facial hair for this Wuhan virus that we're all living through.
Well, if you decide to join Team Beard, water is warm over here, my friend. Thank you so much. Michael Knowles of The Michael Knowles Show. We appreciate you joining us, man. Stay safe out in California.
All right. Thanks, Buck. You too. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe. And if you're not going to do that, all I can say is, how dare you?